Welcome to the Bulletproof Cashflow podcast, the go-to place to gain financial freedom through real estate investing. Here we interview investors, mentors, and entrepreneurs who share their secrets and advice to help you build passive income. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, it's Agostino. Deal syndication is the preferred method for taking down large real estate deals. And really, getting a great attorney on board is absolutely critical to keeping you in compliance with the SEC and really help you navigate the state and regulatory waters when it comes to doing PPMs and private placement offerings. Well, today's guest, he's one of the nation's leading syndication attorneys. He works to a great deal with the real estate guys, and he puts on these big summits every year, educates hundreds of brand new real estate entrepreneurs, and really helps them get on the course to not only raise money, but to become successful real estate people. So he's also the CEO and founder of the Premier Law Group, a premier boutique securities law firm based out of California. With all that, I'd like to welcome Mauricio Rauld to the show. Hey man, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. That's going to be great. Well, if you look at what Mauricio has to say, you can reach him via his website at premierlawgroup.net. And of course, if you like our content, please don't forget to leave a comment and rate the show. And finally, if you text the word freedom to 202-410-4202, you'll get a free ebook, The Bulletproof Guide to Finding a Broker. Okay, Mauricio, go ahead and tell the listeners about how you got started, how you're succeeding in this line of business.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of I don't know if it's a unique story, but after I went to I went to Cal Berkeley up north in Northern California, then I went to Loyola down here in LA for law school, and then I did what everybody dreams of doing, which I went to work for a law firm, a pretty large law, actually the largest law firm in Long Beach, California, where we did securities work. But I did sort of litigation, so I would be in charge of representing the big brokerage houses like Merrill Lynch and sorry about that, I was representing, Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch and Prudential and the big boys, but it was all litigation. So it always came to me once the hit the fan, right? Like there was a complaint, somebody sued these companies, and I would defend them. I would file responses. We'd do depositions and trial and what you think. But I always knew that was just not what I wanted to do. I was literally finding myself in the rat race, which I know a lot of your listeners are very familiar with, of just getting up in the morning, grinding all day, coming home, and really not having much of a life, even though it was a great firm. And long story short, I got really lucky because I came across the little purple book that I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with, which is the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, which I devoured in one plane ride back from a birthday party from the East Coast. And it's not only the book that was important for me and obviously changed didn't actually change my thinking, but it just reinforced all the things that didn't quite make sense to me while I was doing this rat race stuff. So his book was very instrumental. But the key for me was that book introduced me to Robert Kiyosaki, obviously, and he did a radio ad for the real estate guys, and that was the turning point. I'll never forget it. But I'm driving down the road, and I hear Robert Kiyosaki with a radio drop in. And had I not read the book, that would have meant nothing to me. It would have just been another commercial, and I would have not paid attention. But that book essentially was really recommending the real estate guys, and they were putting on an event down in Southern California. And that's what prompted me to go to that event, which blew me away, and eventually get into a relationship with Robert and Russ, which then led to me becoming their general counsel, their in-house counsel, which allowed me to leave my law firm life and go work in-house general counsel for Robert and Russ and the real estate guys in the development company, which is really what got me going in a different direction. And for me, what happened is I was doing all of their syndication work, all of their asset protection work, all of their interactions with their outside counsel. And slowly but surely, I started helping their members. And so, with their permission, obviously, I was just helping people out with asset protection or some of their syndication. And that's how I then kind of grew that into my own practice, where in 2006, I started Premier Law Group, which at the time did whatever put food on the table. But over the years has evolved, and now 100% of my practice is syndication law, or securities law, really technically. But I help real estate investors basically scale their businesses by raising capital to buy bigger and better deals.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, many of our listeners are trying to do the same sort of thing, right? They're either making the transition, or they're looking to transition into raising money for their own deals. And oftentimes, many people don't even understand what the differences are between a 506B, a 506C, why even do all that, who cares about that? And not to mention too, how do you actually go about doing it from a legal perspective,
Right.
and stay in compliance and not get in trouble with the SEC? Those are people you don't want to mess around with, right?
Yeah, I mean, it gets even more basic. I was gonna say basic or more basic than that. Like people literally don't realize that they're selling securities and the SEC is even involved, right? Because they're just buying a piece of property. Like I'm going to go buy a single family home or a duplex or a self-storage or whatever it is. And I'm getting my buddies to pitch in a little bit of capital to go do this deal. And they don't make the connection. Why would you? Like, why is the SEC involved in this stuff when I'm buying real estate? And they don't realize that the definition of a security is so broad that anytime you're taking money from passive investors, you're essentially selling securities. And so that makes it necessary for us to comply with all the federal and state securities laws, which can get pretty complex.
Yeah. Well, let's take a step back then. Let's discuss what is security then. How does a person either maybe getting into a small deal or any size deal for that matter, because it doesn't matter. I mean, I look to do small and big deals because the legal cost is pretty much the same.
Right.
But we could talk a little bit about that. Like, why is it important? Why is it even necessary to do all this?
Yeah. So great question. So the way I like to define it is anytime you take money from an investor where the returns are generated by your efforts. Again, anytime you take money from an investor where the returns are generated by your efforts, you are dealing with a security. So in essence, if your people you take money from are passive, you're doing all the work and then you're just giving them a return, that's a security. And it doesn't matter how you structure it. It doesn't matter if you're doing it in a corporation, in a limited liability company, if you do it as a handshake or a side agreement or a profit sharing or whatever the structure is, it's irrelevant. The minute you take money from passive investors, you are issuing securities and need to comply with federal and state. And you bring up a really important point that the compliance cost is real. And so there's a fixed, it's usually a pretty steady fixed cost, whether you're raising $15 million or you're raising $15. Like it really doesn't matter. The level of compliance is the same because it's complying with the act of raising money. Whether you raise $1 or $1 million is irrelevant. So it's harder and harder to do smaller deals because your compliance cost is high relative to the amount of money you're raising. If you're going to go buy a $100,000 single family home and you raise money from 3 or 4 of your buddies and everybody puts in 25 grand or whatever, so you raise $75,000, your compliance cost is probably going to be somewhere around 15 grand or 20 grand, which as a percentage of that 75,000 is huge. I mean, it's like it's what is that, 20% cost, which is going to kill whatever numbers you have. So that's why I always encourage folks to think a little bit bigger. I mean, the whole idea of syndication is to scale up, and doesn't mean you can't do little small single family homes. We do those all the time. We just put them together. So instead of buying one single family home for 100 grand, we buy 10 of them. And so now I need $1 million. And now at $1 million, it starts to make sense because now you're spending 15, 20 grand. It's like 1.5%, 2% of your raise.
Okay. So now what if I say, listen, Mauricio, I don't want to pay the $20,000. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a JV instead. JVs are easier. I'm just going to do a JV. Why would you discourage me to do that? Or maybe you wouldn't, I don't know.
Well, we go back to the definition we said originally. Like if you are engaged in a legitimate JV, which means every single person in that deal is active, because the minute you have a passive person, then you're issuing a security. Remember we said anytime you have at least one person where the returns are generated by your efforts, meaning they're passive, then you cross a line to a security. So if you have a JV with 3 or 4 of your buddies and all 4 of you are actively involved in the purchase of that property, everybody's bringing money, you guys divvy up the work, and you do the acquisition, you do the underwriting, you do the whatever it is, but between the returns are generated by the 4 of you, not by any one particular person, then great, you've engaged in a joint venture, so you're fine. But just because you call it a joint venture, remember I said the structure itself doesn't matter. So just because you call it a joint venture doesn't mean it's not a security. So if you have, usually it happens with bigger numbers, but if you have 4 or 5 or 6 people in a joint venture, but one of them doesn't really do anything, they're primarily the money person, or maybe they're writing the check and they're doing very little work, that could be considered now a security for that one individual. And therefore you violated securities laws because you thought you were doing a joint venture. You were calling it a joint venture, but the SEC took a different approach and believes you're selling securities because you have at least one passive investor in that structure.
Yeah, and the reason why I bring that up, and the joint venture, which is a JV, is because many people are very tempted with these smaller deals to sort of like skirt the rules, so to speak, and go ahead and set up a JV or set up a partnership because they don't want to spend extra $20,000, right?
That's right. People, and it's not just JV. People try and do my other favorite one, which is kind of like a JV too, a tenants in common. So everybody says, well, let's everybody just be a direct owner of the property. Let's four of us. Let's all be TICs, tenants in common. Some people want to do, hey, I'll just give you a note, or I'll do a profit sharing agreement. They just try and come up with these things thinking they're going to get around the securities laws when that's just not the case. And so you just got to be really careful. And remember, the main penalty, when you just think of this when you're putting this together, the main penalty, there's two main penalties. I kind of joke about, going to jail and staying out of jail. The reality is, unless you're committing fraud and you're Bernie Madoff, that's not likely. But what the penalties are, number one, you're essentially guaranteeing your investors' return. So if they put in 25 grand or 100 grand and the thing fails for no fault of your own, maybe some global pandemic shows up and that clearly wasn't your fault, but because you didn't comply with the securities laws, they have a claim against you. The remedy for them is for you to pay them their money back. So if they give you 25 grand, you've got to return the 25 grand plus interest, which most likely you don't have. And so most likely you end up filing for bankruptcy, and you will most likely get barred. Not most likely, you will get barred. The question is how long, but you'll get barred from raising money in the future. So if this is something you've thought about doing as a career or as a side hustle or whatever, having that blemish on your record will prevent you from raising capital in the future. So violating the securities laws is not something that you want to take lightly, because there are serious consequences, and they're mostly felonies.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to make this a career, then it sounds to me like you really need to take the capital raising component very, very seriously. Don't skirt the laws. It'll just do more harm than good. It'll kill your whole career. It'll literally kill your whole career.
Yeah, 100%. And so if you're not raising that much capital and the 20 grand or the whatever, it's too prohibitive, and it's prohibitive. Like that's the unfortunate piece of this, is that it is a very heavily regulated industry. And so there is a compliance cost, and it's not just the attorney fees, it's state filing fees and potentially other fees involved, or the services you've got to hire. So it just doesn't make sense to go raise 200 grand. You've got to at least be raising, 600-700 grand for it to make sense. But you basically just have to put the number in your spreadsheet and see if it makes sense.
Well, even 600-700 grand doesn't make sense if the deal's that small, honestly. I mean, that's just what I think. I've done small deals, I've done big deals, and the big deals are an absolute godsend, especially when there's a huge economic downturn, unexpected. The big deals are easily survive compared to a small deal, but that's a whole other discussion.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
That's a whole other discussion. All right, maybe let's quickly break down maybe some of the two different, well, there's many different, but the two different ones that you primarily deal with when it comes to like 506B, 506C, that kind of thing, what the differences are. And because I know actually it's funny, because I think you and I have seen recent posts on Facebook, people just saying, hey, I'll give you a return of X if you go ahead and call me and give me some money. I can't believe that someone just did that,
Yeah. So the way it works is, once you realize you're selling securities, you essentially have to either register that security with the SEC, or you have to find an exemption. And long story, but you don't want to be registering your syndication. So you're always looking for an exemption. And that's what you're referencing. The two most common exemptions are these 506B as in boy and 506C as in Charlie. These are the two most common exemptions. In fact, about 95% of the people use these, and there's reasons for those. But they mainly pivot. The differences are very similar. They mainly pivot on two things. One is the ability to advertise. So as you mentioned, if you're relying on a 506B as in boy, you are prohibited from advertising. So you are prohibited from going on a Facebook or putting on your website or going on a podcast or doing anything in the public eye that would basically pitch your deal, right? And so if you're planning on advertising, that's great. Just don't pick that exemption. Pick another exemption that allows you. So for example, the 506C would be an exemption that allows you to do all that great stuff. Now, the limitation with the 506C is that it only allows you to accept accredited investors. So you're a little bit more limited in who can come into your deals. They have to be people who either have $1 million in net worth, excluding their primary residence, or they've earned a couple $100,000 the last couple of years with a reasonable expectation of earning at least that much this year. And so that's the limitation over there. If you're just starting out and you want to have non-accredited investors, and you want your friends and your family and your Aunt Jenny is non-accredited, then great, go with the 506B, but just understand you cannot advertise under a 506B. And that's where I think you're referencing to is when you see people doing 506Bs and they're posting things on Facebook, for example, that either directly talks about their deal, which is a big no-no, even, obviously saying, not obviously, but if you're saying, hey, I'm looking to raise $1 million to buy this apartment building, call me, that's clearly a violation of the 506B rules because you're advertising for your deal. But other subtle things also count as advertising, and it's kind of a gray area, which makes it really frustrating for people, but it's what's called conditioning the market. So anything that you post, whether, again, Facebook, a website, whatever, that drums up interest, excitement about your deal or potential deal is also going to be viewed by the SEC as conditioning the market and therefore advertising and therefore violating 506B. And so it just gets a little bit tricky because then the questions start becoming, well, where's the bright line between not conditioning the market and conditioning the market? And in my mind, there's some that are clearly yes, clearly no, but there's clearly a gray muddle period in the middle. And that's what's frustrating for everyone.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because if I have a C, if I have a 6C, and I'm getting out there talking about this deal over here, but I'm pulling people in, and then I start diverting them over to my B over here.
Well, that would be, I think, a clear violation.
A clear violation.
Yeah, because generally in a 506B where you cannot advertise, generally you need to have what's called a pre-existing relationship, a pre-existing substantive relationship with the investor. So if you brought somebody in through a Facebook ad or a website or a podcast that you've never met, even though you were advertising a 506C deal, which was fine, and then you get on the phone with them and you say, well, I've got this other deal, let's put you in there. Well, you don't have a pre-existing relationship, meaning pre-existing your deal. So they're not going to be eligible for a deal that exists now. You would have to create a substantive relationship first, and then they'd be eligible for your next deal. And so that's kind of the process, really the legal way, I would say, to add people to your network and to your list, so to speak, is to bring them in without advertising. So meeting them at, you and I met at the Rod Khleif event, right? In here in LA. And so that was a legitimate meeting between you and me. I didn't know you from Adam, but I could go through specific steps that the SEC has given us guidance with, where I get to a point where I get to know you really well. And I have now a substantive relationship with you. Well, now when I have my next deal in a couple of months, I can say, hey, I met you in 4 or 5 months ago. Let's have you. I can definitely offer you this deal because I now have a pre-existing substantive relationship with you.
Right. That's right. And that's the thing, though, too. I think many people are not aware of those sorts of limitations. And I mean, those limitations are there for a good reason. I mean, you're supposed to take that time to know who that person is. They don't do it to be a pain. They do it because hopefully in that time to build that relationship, you're figuring out, are they really accredited or not? Because if they're not accredited and you take them on and they put in their $100,000, say they do have $100K, that's all they have, that's their life savings, they put it to your deal. And 60 days from now, something happens, they need their money. So they're gonna call you up and they're gonna say, hey, I want my money back. And clearly it's in a deal for, whatever it is, 5 years, whatever the whole time it might be. And you're just gonna deal with a whole lot of problems at that point, right? Because that person can cause a ruckus, and next thing you know, bring the SEC in, even though you did everything you're supposed to do, they could have lied, they could have done whatever just to get into a deal, right? I mean, there's plenty of those guys out there right now.
There's plenty of those guys. And one of your responsibilities as a syndicator, as a sponsor, is you have to be able to evaluate whether your investor, this is a suitable, what's called, it's a term called suitability, that it's a suitable investment for them. So just like you've heard before, if the little old lady, right, the 80-year-old widow comes into you, who needs, cash flow to survive, and they're going to put it into your deal, which is a development deal that's not going to see any cash flow for 5 years and is kind of maybe a higher risk but higher return type investment, that's not a suitable investment for them. And so this process that you go through is really geared towards finding out whether that person is sophisticated and that this investment is suitable for them. Can they, either themselves or with a representative, can they really evaluate the merits and the risks of your deal and make an intelligent decision? That's what you're trying to find out in that process.
Yeah, and that's key. I mean, there's a guy I know right now. He had to hold back some of his distributions. He let his investors know, hey, I'm holding back the distributions for the next 3 months while we're going through this global pandemic, for instance, is when we're recording this. And some of these people are putting this guy on blast all over Facebook. Hey, this guy, this syndicator over here is holding back our money. He's failing. He's going down. That's not the case. I mean, he's being prudent to protect the investment and protect the investors. That's what he's doing, right?
Right, 100%. I mean, I think right now one of the unless your deal is very unique and strong, certainly if you're in the multifamily business and you've raised capital, then most clients that I've spoken to, and most people in general I've spoken to, have suspended distributions because they're all about conserving cash. Because the last thing you want to do is continue making distributions, then run out of cash, and then have to do a cash call 6 months from now, because if you fail on the cash call, you may lose the property. So
right.
Long term, that's not a good, as a manager, as a fiduciary of that person's money, even though the investors may want the money, what's in the best interest of all the investors and the property, which is what the syndicate is looking out for, is to hold on to that cash to make sure that there's enough cash to continue to run the property, and more importantly, to be able to pay the mortgage, the loan that's on the property. Because if you fail to pay the loan, as you know, you run the risk of eventually losing the property.
That's right. And it's in the best interest of you as the GP, as the general partner on the asset, to make sure it's run properly. So,
and that's why it's so important on the front end to make sure that you're disclosing all these things to the investors, so that the investors go into the deal with their eyes wide open. And you may be promising, look, we expect you to be getting X, Y, Z returns every year, but they're certainly not guaranteed. And there are certain scenarios that may happen, whether it's a global pandemic, maybe it's just a regular recession, maybe there's a fire. I mean, there's all these risks that are involved that may prevent the sponsor from giving them the investment. So that's the whole point of what I do. My whole job is to look at your deal, understand what risks your deal poses to the investors, and make sure we put those in the documentation, so that when they read this document, hopefully they read the document, everything is disclosed and they go into it with eyes wide open, and they can make an intelligent decision whether this is the right investment for them or not.
Right. Well, I mean, that's some of it too. Many of these guys don't even read the document at all. Right. There's that to contend with.
I can't help them there. I mean, I can't help them there. There's only so much I can do. I can give them that. What's the saying? You can only bring the horse to the water or whatever. You can't force it to drink.
Right. That's right. So I know it's through around the terms accredited, non-accredited. We should probably explain what that is.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of definitions, but the main ones: an accredited investor is somebody that has $1 million in net worth, excluding their primary residence. And you can thank California for that. That's a relatively new addition, because back in 2004 or 5, 6, California real estate was going so high. Like, everybody in California was accredited because their home values were so high. So they took that away. So it's $1 million in net worth, excluding your primary residence. Or on the income side, if you've earned $200,000 the last 2 years, have a reasonable expectation of earning at least $200,000 this year, then you're an accredited investor. And if you're married, then that goes up to $300,000.
Yeah. So there you go. So see that, guys. Ultimately, vetting out who is accredited, who's not accredited before you present your deal is going to be important. It also shows their level of sophistication too, which we didn't talk about sophisticated investor as well, which is another person who can maybe invest in a deal like this too, right?
Yeah. So if the rule is, if you're going to accept non-accredited investors, by the way, there's a limit to that. So if you are going to go the 506B route and you decide to take, because you can go 506B and take all accredited, but if you're going to 506B and you elect to take non-accredited investors, then you are going to be, number one, limited to 35 of those, which usually isn't an issue. I mean, unless you're raising either a huge amount of money coupled with a small minimum, usually you don't run into that issue, but it's out there. So that's one of the reasons we keep track of how many non-accredited. We don't want to hit up against that 35 limit. And then those non-accredited investors must be sophisticated, meaning kind of the same thing as suitability. They've got to have sufficient knowledge, either themselves or with a representative, have sufficient knowledge that they can evaluate the risks and the merits of the particular investment. And so that's something that they would represent, but that's what you would be doing in that process of getting to know your investor well and establishing that substantive relation. That's what you're trying to figure out. Are they sophisticated? Is this a suitable investment for them? Are they accredited? Are they not accredited? How much money do they make? How much have they invested in syndication before? What's their level of knowledge? Like, all that stuff is part of that process of figuring out and establishing that substantive relationship.
Yeah. So I know we touched on the advertising side of things, but nowadays, A lot of webinars out there, a lot of gurus out there, selling their wares, that kind of thing, and also promoting their deals. So I have a lot of the people that are experienced at doing this. Have you ever found issues with some of the advertising some of those guys have done?
Oh, there's always issues, I find. I mean, look, my recommendation in general, when it comes to, let's just say we're talking about social media, but this applies to, again, websites, your website's public, podcasts, anything else you're doing, but let's just use social media specifically. My recommendation is if you're currently actively raising money for a deal, you have an active deal going, I would stay off of social media, because the risk, when I say stay off, relating to real estate or whatever you're raising money, you can obviously still post pictures of your dog and your cat and your kids or whatever you want to do. But in terms of the business side, I would just stay away. I think there's so much gray area that we just don't know if this particular post crosses the line, and I'm not sure what you're gaining. And plus, that's not the time to be looking for new investors anyway. The time to look for new investors is when you don't have a deal, when you're in between deals. That's the best time to find investors, because number one, there's no pressure. It's not like when you're talking to somebody that they're like, oh, here it is, he's gonna come ask me for 50 grand, or there's no pressure. It's just like, here's what I do. These are the types of investments I look for. More importantly, what are you looking for? What kind of, are you looking for, equity deals, debt deals, cash flow, equity or appreciation. And then you kind of end the discussion with like, look, if I find something that meets your criteria, are you okay with me, sending you information? And that's how you start those relationships. So it's a lot easier to add people and meet new people in between deals anyway. But when it comes to social media, if you've got a deal, I would say stay off. If you don't have a deal, then I would stick to two things that the SEC has said clearly is okay. One is factual information about you and your business. So there's nothing wrong with saying all the information about your resume and where you come from. I mean, I know it's a little bit of a dry, but what your company does, just like your website, you can talk about what your company does, what kind of assets they invest in, what's your strategy, are you a flipper, are you a long-term hold? Like you can talk about factual, almost like your bio, right? No problem. And then the other thing I think you can do is pure value add, meaning there's nothing wrong with you providing your audience on social media information that they deem valuable, like for example, why real estate is such a great asset class, or why mobile home parks, or why self-storage, or whatever the asset class is, why it's such a great investment, or why the state of why Houston, Texas, or Miami, Florida is a great real estate market, and you can do a market study or market report. Or maybe you just want to educate them and do a webinar on real estate 101, like why real estate. So all of those are you don't have a deal. So you're not talking about your deal. You're not talking about your future deals. You're not talking about prior deals. You're not talking about, you're purely giving value. And you get some kind of, contact information, right? In exchange for that content, whether it's an email, a phone number, whatever. Now I have that information from you. Now go through these steps, take them from a complete stranger all the way to having a substantive relationship, so that when you get that substantive relationship, they're eligible for your next deal. That's the way I would continue to add people to your list, and not just social media. Go to the meetups, go to the Rod Khleif events that we met at. These events are really great, whether it's Rod Khleif or the real estate guys, or Adam Adams, or any of these events that you go to. You meet people. You're not pitching their deals, you're meeting them. There are other people, there are other people that have, like-minded people, and exchange business cards. Great. That's step one. Then go through the process and get to that substantive relationship part, so you can offer them future deals.
Well, I mean, that itself is probably one of the biggest hangups that many people don't get, is that, especially new people rather, you're always trying to meet new people. That to build your network, right? And creating a CRM, go to HubSpot, free CRM, grab those business cards every single meeting, you follow up with them, tell them what you do, see what they're about, see how you can help them. Because again, when they're throwing money into one of your deals, you're helping them build wealth. You're not doing them a favor. You're not saying, please, please, please invest in my deal. Your approach is, right, I'll help you, Mr. Investor or Mrs. Investor. I'll help by you invest in this deal. I'll give you a return. And this is always happening. It's always,
but you've got to add value. I go to a lot of I speak at a lot of conferences, and so I'm handing out business cards and so forth. And inevitably, I will get an email that says, "Hey, nice meeting you," whatever. That I get that introductory email, which is great. But then inevitably, I don't hear from the person ever again. And the next email I get is them offering me their next deal. And
Yeah.
that's not the way to do it because they don't know me. We don't have a substantive relationship. We just met at some conference and now I'm getting their emails. You've got to go through a specific set of steps. And the main ones are pick up the phone and call them and have an actual conversation with them, or go have coffee with them or lunch or whatever, but have a one-on-one conversation with them. And number two, it's generally accepted if you want to send them a questionnaire, like kind of a detailed questionnaire to find out all this information that we've been talking about, their net worth, their level of experience, probably talk about that questionnaire on the phone call. And then, encourage them to ask questions of you, encourage them to go through your website, encourage them, facilitate that interaction so they understand, number one, what your philosophy is in terms of what type of deals you're looking for, and then for you to understand what type of investments and knowledge they have. And that can take, there's no magic number. That's not 3 days, 30 days, a week. There's no magic number. It's just the quality of those interactions. So does it mean that if I have 10 conversations, that's good enough? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know what you talked about. Is it possible to establish that relationship in 24 hours? Probably, but it's going to be your burden to prove that. So you want to keep records of, every call you have, every email you have, so that if it ever gets challenged, you can say, no. I was, I hung out with Agostina for a while. And in fact, we spent, my favorite one is one of the things we used to do with the real estate guys, and they still do this. Well, not right now, but you do field trips. You do field trips with people. So you would go, sometimes we go to, to Belize, or we go to the Phoenix market or whatever hot market is out there. And literally a group of investors, anywhere from, 10 to 15 to as many as 30 or 40, literally spend 48 to 72 hours together. Like from the minute they wake up and they have breakfast together to late at night from cocktail hour, they're together. And so I think it's arguable that if you do it right, you can definitely establish a substantive relationship with somebody in those 3 days because you spent literally 72 hours nonstop with them. Contrast that with somebody that you just met and you get an email from them once every 6 months about some random stuff. That's not going to be a substantive relationship.
That's right.
It's the quality of the interactions, not the timeline.
Well, you know what though? What you said is adding value to people's lives. I mean, I know it's hard to do. That's the thing. I mean, the follow-up required. When you go to one conference, you might meet 20 people, 30 people, maybe 50 if you're doing very well. Then to follow up with all 50 of those people, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, but that's how you do it. I have plenty.
That's how it's done.
For example, I have plenty of clients who have, like you have a podcast, right? And so they are getting contact information from their listeners constantly. My clients literally schedule in a week and they schedule calls. Maybe it's 3 a day. And so they end up doing 15 calls a week or 20 calls a week. It doesn't even have to be you personally. It could be your, somebody on your team, a team member, but they're making a conscious effort to pick up the phone and talk to 15, 20, 25 people a week so that over time they get to talk to everyone, because that's a critical component. If you're doing a 506B, that prohibits advertising. If you're doing a 506C that allows advertising, then forget all that. You can go meet somebody at a conference, never met them before, and stuff a business plan in their face and tell them to sign right then and there.
Well, and by the way, if everybody wants an easy way to remember 506C, C stands for crowdfunding. Think of it like that. You just send it out to the crowd, right? It's one good way of remembering what that might be. So
I like that.
Tell the difference between the two. But
I like that.
Yeah, it's I think in order for someone to do an actual C, you really need to have an audience, like a very, very big audience, right? Your ability to market must be on point, and you have to have a name or a brand out there. And for most syndicators, the majority of syndicators out there, they don't really have that. There's a handful I know personally, they're good friends that actually have that kind of reach.
Let me tell you, this is a quick story that I don't tell that often, but I would not impose, I try now not to impose my limiting beliefs on any of the stuff. I used to work many years ago for a mobile home park company, and our marketing guy suggested doing Google AdWords, and because we were doing 506C deals. And my reaction was, there's no way somebody's going to just Google out of the blue the asset class, the mobile home park. Our information is going to come up and they're going to go write $100,000, $200,000 check. There's just no way. Boy, was I wrong. We didn't spend that much money on Google AdWords, and people were scheduling calls with us, and we were getting $100,000, $200,000, $250,000 investments from these people we've never met before that found us on a Google ad search. So if you have an ability through marketing. If you've got good marketing skills, whether it's social media, Google, podcasting, whatever it is, then definitely keep 506c in mind, because that does allow you to do pretty much anything you want.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I had a friend of mine just recently ask me about that, to kick off a 506c, and I wasn't really sure. I was like, I'm not sure, but that story does bring about someone else, another friend of mine, that he actually had $1 million come in from someone. Never met him. It was a C, just rolled in. Here's $1 million. And I had no idea who it was.
A lot of times there's investors who actually have a time crunch, so they don't even have time to get to know you, because, for example, they may need to do a 1031 exchange, and maybe their option A fell apart, and now they're really up against the clock, and they need to find another property in 30 days, and they may have $500,000 or $1 million, and they're desperate and they need to find something, and so you can offer them an opportunity for them to come into your deal, and so you're helping them, but you don't have time for any of this stuff, getting to know them. But so just keep that in mind. I mean, there's definitely, as long as you're filling a need, there's always somebody that could use your help.
Yeah. All right. Now, Mauricio, what do you see the next 5 years looking like for your business?
That's a great question. That's a tough question, because there's two ways I see this. So obviously I'm in the syndication business. So the question is, what is syndication going to look like? I believe that people are, which has happened, they're kind of taking a pause right now. The last, especially in multifamily, not too many people raising money, although I know you are, but they're taking a pause. But there's going to be so many great deals out there because of what's happened. If you have a great track record and you have the ability to raise money, the amount of great deals compared to what you've been buying for the last 3, 4, 5 years is going to be off the chart. So if you have the ability to get the capital, especially if lending continues to be a little bit constructed and you need even more capital, then I think you're going to see sort of an influx, because they are going to definitely, unfortunately, let me backtrack too. Unfortunately, I do see a lot of first-time syndicators or inexperienced syndicators overpaying and picking up overvalued properties the last couple of years. And so whenever you have a little bit of a hiccup, like we do now, they're not going to be able to survive that. They don't have the reserves. They've overpaid. They didn't stress test it. And so now if their occupancy goes down, or they're going to be trouble. And so those are going to be either taken back by the bank, or just directly sold at a discount, just to save everybody's money, or try and get at least 50 cents on the dollar, or some return for the investor. So there's just going to be a ton of opportunity out there. And so if you're a syndicator and have the ability to raise money, in theory, you can raise an unlimited amount of money. There's going to be so many great deals with me that I think a lot of them are going to come out of the woodwork and start raising capital again.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why underwriting is super important. Always. All right. Well, hey, thanks for coming on, Mauricio. Greatly appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And congratulations on all the great work you're doing with the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, guys, if you want to reach out to Mauricio, you can reach him through his company website at premierlawgroup.net. Hope you got a lot of great insight on how to set up a syndication of your own. By all means, give Mauricio a call. He'll certainly hook you up. You can certainly see it's a crucial to your success. All right. Take care, guys. I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the Bulletproof Cashflow podcast.